Welcome. We're continuing our explorations from Genesis, and today we're looking at that mysterious and fascinating account of Jacob wrestling all night. So let's set the scene before we get to the actual reading. So Jacob's returning back home, and this is why. Let's review our interaction between Jacob and his uncle Laban. So he's been with Laban for 14 years. He scored 2 wives and 12 children. And it's time to go home, says Jacob. But Laban knows that Jacob has God's particular blessing. And he knows that it's flowing on to himself, Laban, and all that he has. So he's not interested in letting Jacob go. Why would you let the golden goose go? So he renegotiates the wages. First 14 years, that's been for marrying the 2 sisters. Now let's build up your stock and let's build up your assets. And so they negotiate, and I can't remember the exact details, but Jacob says, oh, I'll have all the stripy and speckled goats and sheep and you can have all the rest. But Laban's a trickster, just like Jacob. And guess what? When it comes time to separate all those sheep and goats out, they've all disappeared suddenly. Laban's grabbed them and removed them. So what Jacob does over the next 6 years, and he's obviously a very good farming person, he follows very careful breeding plans, and he is very, very successful. Suddenly he's got large numbers, and they're top quality sheep and goats and other animals. And in fact, they're much better than Laban's. And over 6 years, the resentment builds up. Laban's workers hate seeing Laban being pushed down, and Laban hates seeing it. Finally, he's out of favor with Laban. And then comes another word from God. It's time to go back home. So while Laban is out shearing 3 days away, Jacob has a secret meeting with Leah and Rachel out in the fields where servants can't report back to Laban. And he says, it's time to go. My God's told me to go. And Leah and Rachel feel like their father has sold them out and doesn't care about them. They're happy to leave. They're happy to trust God's word. And interestingly, Rachel steals a household god. So it's like a two-way bet. Yes, I believe in your God, Jacob, but I'm going to take these 2 little practical sources of power, the ones that we believe help and bless us. There's other stories attached to that. We're not going to follow that through at the moment. So Laban receives word. Jacob's done a runner. You can't run very fast when you're carrying 12 kids and thousands and thousands of stock. It's a slow escape. So Laban catches him up within 7 days. The night before he's about to catch up with Jacob, Laban is given a warning, a dream warning from God that Jacob's protected. So there is a confrontation meeting between Jacob and Laban. The upshot is that they make a mutual agreement, a covenant of non-harm. They'll stay separated, but they're going to not harm each other. And it's interesting, Laban insists that Jacob continue to be a faithful husband to his 2 daughters, not chase after other women. It's interesting, the daughters didn't feel supported, but Laban obviously values them and their well-being. So there's a big pillar of stone set up. There's a big celebration dinner that night. And then the next morning, Laban kisses and farewells his daughters and his grandchildren. And off they all go, back to the land where Jacob came from. So that's the past 20 years now, with Laban sorted and settled. But there's all this unsorted and unsettled stuff from Jacob's earlier life. Remember, he's one of twins. He's the younger twin. His much bigger and stronger brother Esau, Jacob tricked. First of all, he obtained the birthright, and then he tricked his father into giving him the unique blessing. And so he had to run away 20 years ago because his bigger, stronger twin was going to kill him. So he's coming back, and all this stuff is unsorted, and he has no idea how Esau is going to receive him. So he sends messengers ahead. And the messages are to bring the message, I'm returning home. I've got lots of animals and serving men and women, so I've made a success of my life. Let me find favour in your sight, my Lord. He's not insisting on that he's the top dog. He's showing humility or submission to his big brother. Messengers return. Yeah, Esau's coming to meet you. And he's got 400 men with him. Whoa. So now Jacob is fearing for his very life. So what does he do? He divides everyone and everything into two big groups, and he hopes that at least one of them will escape being captured or destroyed. And he prays. And it's actually not too bad a prayer. He's quite honest about how he is and the situation he is and how he's feeling. So that's good. And he reminds God of his promises. And that's good too. And then, being Jacob, he reverts back to his normal way of doing things. So he tries to buy off his brother, and he sends a little present. Listen to the amount in the present. 200 she-goats, 20 he-goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 camels with their calves, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, 10 male donkeys. He's trying to buy out his brother. So if you take a moment here, how do you rate Jacob's strategy for getting back and making peace or sorting through those past issues with his brother? His strategy is divide, pray, and send a lavish present. If you were Jacob's mate, or if you were advising Jacob, what would you be telling him? What can you see that Jacob seems to be unable to understand or to get? And now let's hear the little scripture reading that we're going to reflect on. Jacob instructed the first one out. These are the ones carrying the presents. When my brother Esau comes close and asks, "Who's your master? Where are you going? Who owns these?" Answer him like this: "Your servant Jacob. They're a gift to my master Esau. He's on his way." They gave the same instructions to the second servant and the third, to each in turn, as they set out with their herds. Say, "Your servant Jacob is on his way behind us." He thought, "I'll soften him up with the succession of gifts. Then, when he sees me face to face, maybe he'll be glad to welcome me." So his gifts went before him while he settled down for the night in the camp. But during the night he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He got them safely across the brook, along with all his possessions. But Jacob stayed behind by himself, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he couldn't get the best of Jacob as they wrestled, he deliberately threw Jacob's hip out of joint. The man said, "Let me go, it's daybreak." Jacob said, "I'm not letting you go till you bless me." The man said, "What's your name?" He answered, "Jacob." The man said, "But no longer. Your name's no longer Jacob. From now on it's Israel, God wrestler. You've wrestled with God and you've come through." Jacob asked, "And what's your name?" The man said, "Why do you want to know my name?" And then, right then and there, he blessed him. Jacob named the place Peniel, God's face, because he said, "I saw God face to face and lived to tell the story." The sun came up as he left Peniel, limping because of his hip. That's why Israelites to this day don't eat the hip muscle, because Jacob's hip was thrown out of joint. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So let's talk about how God meets us in our stuck places and helps us to move forward. Here's Jacob at the Jabbok Creek, and he's stuck, quite literally stuck, unable to cross. He pushes his womenfolk and children and all his goods and possessions across, but he can't make the move. At night, he's stuck. And I think we can all identify with that experience. I think we all have times when our normal ways of doing things just stop working and they won't get us through the situation we're going to face. And certainly Jacob has lots of room to grow and lots of room to learn because he's a very messed up past and he's not showing any signs of actually working through it in a good way. Isn't it fascinating? God comes to him and wrestles with him. If you're coming up with a picture or an image of God, you can talk about Jesus on the cross, you can talk about the Good Shepherd, you can talk about the bread of life. How often do you picture God as a wrestler? Someone who comes down to our level and actually grapples with us for hours. And yet, that's what God does here. God comes to us disguised as our life. God isn't just in the amazing things, he's also very much involved in our ordinary, day-to-day, unspectacular, maybe our messes, and certainly our failures. God comes to us disguised as our life. So Jacob has the blessing. He's got the promises of protection. He's had the gift of remarkable God dreams at different times, but it's not enough. It doesn't change him deep down. He's not able to trust totally in them. He's always got to manipulate, be tricky, do his business deals, get it all sorted out the way he wants. And so if there's going to be some change in Jacob, it's going to have to be the hard way. And so God chooses close bodily contact and wrestling for hours and hours in the darkness at the side of the creek. Jacob has to struggle. And it's interesting, God allows himself to be quite human. Not super strong. He's not going to use his super strong God powers until he taps him on the hip and dislocates a hip. He holds Jacob there until something starts to change in Jacob. And Jacob, like he always does, longs for God's blessing, and he asks for that. He also receives the gift of a name change. He's now Israel. He's not someone who learns easily, so he's got to hang in there and struggle with God. And God allows him to win. So God chooses to be vulnerable and very real and personal to Jacob. God comes to us disguised as our life. And if we're thinking about this text, what are we called to keep grappling with? Maybe it's easy just to give up and it's all too hard and I'm never going to be any good at this. What are we called to keep grappling with, not to walk away from? I think there are important things in all of our lives. Obviously, there are things we have to let go of, but there are important things that are really vital not to let go of, to stay with. And how is God present in the things I'm struggling with? How does God reveal himself right there in my life? And what's the blessing that I need to ask for? What's the blessing that I so badly want or need? You're allowed to ask for it. And finally, Jacob's hips get thrown out. It's okay to limp for a while. We're not all super strong, super successful all the time. The struggle takes a cost out of us, and it's worth paying that cost. So finally something's changed in Jacob. He's ready to cross over, and instead of hanging behind all the gifts and all the different groups, he moves ahead to where he should have been the whole time. Moves ahead of his flocks, moves ahead of his kids and his women folk. He moves ahead and he goes to meet Esau. We can read the meeting in one of two ways. We could meet it as a genuine meeting, or Esau just showing his dominance and strength. But whatever it is, they come to an agreement. They're not going to live together, but they're still able to coexist. And they will come together later to bury their very aged father. A little quote from Brisbane Catholic author Patrick Oliver, and he's looking about how faithful God is here in this text. This is what Patrick says: God honours a relationship despite all in Jacob that would seem to negate it and work against it. And God brings Jacob into maturity and honesty. For divine creativity will never be outdone. So may divine creativity continue to work in all of our dark places, all of our stuck places. May we be given the strength to hold on, to not let go, and in that may we receive and discover God's amazing blessing.